Recording. Right. Good afternoon from a very hot and muggy Yucatan, Mexico. My guest today is our first Australian. We've had a Kiwi from New Zealand. We've had a Hawaiian American, but we've not had an Australian, much to my shame. And it's long overdue. And today's guest is called AB Patterson, also known as the bad boy of Australian crime fiction. And we're going to discuss his book, Harry's World, which came out in 2015. Hi, AB, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Richard. And it's obviously morning down here. With the time zones are always a fascinating thing when we try and have these international link-ups.
Isn't it just? Yeah. You're Andrew, actually, aren't you? So you're
That's
AB
right.
books, but you're Andrew in real life. And which part of Australia are you speaking from?
So I live in Sydney,
Right.
over on the east coast, and I was actually born here a long time ago, but then we left Australia when I was a young kid. So my father got a job in the UK in London, and so I did the rest of my growing up in the UK and France, and then we came back to Australia when I was 18, and at that stage we settled on the other side of the country on the west coast in Perth in Western Australia, and that's where I did all my police service. Until I'd had enough of the police, and then I got a job back here in Sydney, and that was 25 years ago, and I've stayed. So different job, different all sorts of things, but yeah, I've stayed in Sydney. So not
related to the police, your current job then?
No. So I guess I'll give you a bit of a synopsis then. So I did the years in the police, left as a detective sergeant, and come back to some of that if you in due course, but got a job. Most of my detective time was working in child protection and pedophilia. So I got a job originally in Sydney doing child protection review work with the Ombudsman's Office for New South Wales. Then I went to the Corruption Commission as the chief investigator, and investigated government corruption, and there's always plenty of that. So as it features in some of my writing as well. Then I've done a couple of other state government type jobs, again, investigation and review type work. Then I went into local government and was the internal ombudsman for one of the big councils in Sydney. And then 10 years ago, I decided to finally strike out my own. So as a consultant, wanted to have a bit more time for writing. That's not always successful, I have to say, because the bills have to be paid, so still work. Yep. But I work mainly doing investigations, but it's all workplace conduct type stuff. And I also train investigators around the place. So different sort of investigation these days, not as interesting or gritty as some of the stuff I've done in the past, but it does pay the bills, and plus it gives me the freedom to obviously be a writer as well, and write books whenever I can. So yeah,
you say it's interesting and gritty, some of the stuff you did, but you've also alluded that you got sick of it.
Yeah,
and I can understand why. So do we take it you are the sort of traditional cynical ex-cop that's seen it all, and that sort of take?
I'm not sure I've seen it all. I've seen a lot in relation to the first part, the cynical ex-cop. Yes, without I'm not going to try and deny that one. Look, I mean, I think leaving, actually, it wasn't the nature of the work. I mean, I didn't finish my service in the child abuse area. I was in Vice Squad for the last 18 months, which was a fascinating look at the sex industry and the adult industry and that side of society. In terms of police work, it's largely a waste of time, in my view. But except for the sort of the coerced aspects of that industry, which obviously are awful. But I left because I still enjoyed police work as a detective, but I was sick of the police force as an organisation, and the politics and the bureaucracy and what I saw anyway as some quite high level corruption in terms of decision making.
Did this affect your career while you were there, or do they allow for a certain amount of frustration amongst the ranks.
Sorry, I missed the first part of the question there, Richard.
Did this affect your career negatively? Because obviously some of the things you just said wouldn't have gone down well.
No, I mean, one of the things that I did think about before I decided to resign was that I couldn't see myself going any further in the police force. It's whilst, you know, on many levels, I've got a lot of respect for the police as an institution, and obviously civilised society depends on you know, good policing, but it's not an organisation where free thinking is welcomed.
No.
So yeah, I found it quite constraining in that respect. But yeah, I just looked. I tried to look in front of me and thought, no, this is not going to be for me going on. So that's when I decided it was time for a change. So, and I don't regret that at all. I mean, there's many things about the police force that I miss, particularly the camaraderie and a lot of the really good people that I worked with.
Yeah.
And the work. I mean, the 6 or so years I spent dealing with child abuse and pedophilia is without doubt the 6 most satisfying professional years of my entire life. Nothing's ever come close to that. So yeah, so some things I miss about it, but it was definitely the right time for me to leave. And looking back on it now, I think no regrets at all. It was the right time. So and you know, there's other things to do out there as well. So
when we think of Australia, the people around the world, we think of the lucky country, sunshine, surfing. We don't think of an underground sort of crime scene and so on. But from what you're saying, it's every bit as disgusting there, what goes on, as in, say, places that we do associate with crime, like Rio or Manila or somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, certainly that area of crime that I worked in with child abuse and pedophilia, I mean, that's just one of those awful and disgusting aspects of human nature. And so I mean, that occurs everywhere. I think obviously in terms of your violent street type crime, notwithstanding obviously some very recent and raw events here in Sydney, you know, it's, yeah, I mean, this Australia is not, you know, not as overtly violent as you know, quite a few other countries around the place, and you can really only, I guess, compare us to other Western liberal democracies. So you know, I think we're probably similar to the UK in a lot of ways. We obviously, in relation to America, we don't have the same gun culture. We have some guns, but not like the Americans do. So it's a different environment like that. But yeah, there's certainly crime around.
Yeah. We'll come on to the novel Harry's World in a minute, which deals with this from the perspective of Private Eye going under, doing his work. And a lot of the paedophilia and sort of crime that comes through is institutional,
Yeah.
Which I'm sure reflects the reality that you saw. So you're one of the few people who wasn't shocked and horrified when, to the extent that most of us were, when things like Epstein and Weinstein came out and all the associated crimes.
No, you're not. I mean,
would have known about.
Obviously, any, you know, whenever you hear anything like that, it's sickening. But no, it doesn't surprise me, not at all. And interestingly, actually, I was the other night we were watching a documentary on Jim Savile.
Yeah.
And you know, because I remember, you know, watching as a kid in the UK when I was growing up there, you know, watching Jimmy Savile on TV, and it was, you know, but then you see the whole cover-up thing that went on and brushing under the carpet because he was obviously part of the establishment, and that goes on all the time with that area of crime. I mean, that's in a nutshell is one of the, you know, reasons that you know, the pedophile team which I was running ended up getting shut down. So, so well, that was, yeah, I got transferred out, and they put somebody in who was going to do their bidding, and then 6 months later they closed it. Really? I think it's an abject lesson in the fact that you can actually be a little bit too good at what you're doing. So it's, I mean, it's, you know, I'm sorry that I sound cynical and I'm being a little bit flippant about it, but I think I need to be. Yeah, I think it's very much, I mean, one of the themes as you know, no doubt picked up on in my writing is the whole thing about power and the abuse of power. That's certainly something that I'm always fascinated and concerned with. I think very much the establishment, as I frequently refer to it in my work. The establishment is all about power and looking after itself, and so hence when we do have people at certain levels in the establishment who do engage in child sex crimes, the establishment is more concerned with looking after its own and its own reputation rather than concerned with the victims. Unfortunately, that's my view anyway. As cynical as
names a former Prime Minister, wasn't there, of Australia, who's he's not been charged, I don't think, but there's a lot of rumours rife and people screaming blue murder about what he's been up to in Australia. I'd probably best leave that where it is. So how did you've got all this material in your head. Were you, at the time that you were a policeman, conscious that you might one day be writing about this from a fictional perspective, or did that just evolve gradually?
No, it wasn't. And with the benefit of hindsight, I wish I had that foresight. I would have kept a lot more notes. But no, I didn't. Look, I've always loved reading, and ever since I was a kid, I always had lots of books. I'm now sort of drowning in books, but that's you can have worse vices in my view. So I've always loved reading. I didn't really think about writing until it was well after I'd finished in the police and I was over here in Sydney. And then I did start thinking, well, maybe I would like to start writing. And look, originally I had no idea what I wanted to write. I didn't sort of think, right, I'm going to be a crime writer. But constantly hearing that message, write what you know, etc. I know it's a bit of a cliche, but I thought I'll give it a crack. And I read a lot of crime, and particularly the hard-boiled and the hardcore type crime writers. So I thought I'll give this a go. And once I started, I thought, yeah, I love this. So this is what I'm going to do. So, obviously I'd love to be able to just do it full time, but that's not the reality in terms of paying the bills. But so writing crime, I sort of fell into that. And I've got other things, other projects I do want to write. I'll come back to those maybe, but in terms of the crime and also the corruption that I throw in there, because that very much resonates to me in terms of the abuse of power, and having worked with the Corruption Commission here, investigating and seeing not only what politicians and senior bureaucrats get up to, but also I think the biggest thing that surprised me there was the sheer arrogance of these people. When you sit down and interview cabinet ministers, and it's just this look of complete disdain and contempt they have as they look at you across the table. It's so I'm very, very cynical about politics and politicians. But I think one of the factors that really motivates me to write the crime stuff now is apart from wanting to tell what is hopefully an entertaining story. At the end of the day, we want people to read what we write. But it's also to produce crime fiction, which as you know, I don't pull any punches in there. But I do want to write and say, in the stories, that this is what happens out there. This is the real world. Now, some people don't want to read that, and that's fine. When sort of people, I do market stalls on the weekend with my partner. It's her jewellery business, but I have a book stand out the front of my books, so I sell a number. But I always say to people when they pick them up and have a look, and I say, it is hardcore. It's graphic and explicit. If you're comfortable with that, great. But if not, you've been warned. And look, most people who like reading crime fiction don't have a problem with reading that's either. So
territory, doesn't it? So who are the writers that you read, or your preferred writers in the hard-boiled crime scene and in general?
Well, I think the ones that really got me fired up into it and encouraged me to start writing, and then also my own private investigator character. We'll come back to Harry. Obviously, Raymond Chandler. He was the first, and I still think he's one of the heroes of the genre. Ross McDonald is probably my number 2 on the list. I mean, Dashiell Hammett's good as well, but I rate Chandler and McDonald higher, but that's just a personal thing. But they're probably the key ones to start with, and then I've sort of read more widely.
I think Hammett would have been better 10, 20 years later. He almost was too early for the genre. He beat everyone to the gun, and it hadn't quite settled into what it was to become. But he's definitely contributed to a profound member. But he could have. His timing was just slightly wrong. Not his fault, obviously, but yeah. And any modern day,
we're here, so you know.
Yeah, any modern day versions, or are we bereft of any decent hardboiled?
No, not at all. I think whilst he's more modern, although he's not alive anymore, James Crumley, I love his work.
Yeah.
One who is still alive on the other side of the pond over there, Ken Bruin, the Irishman. I think his stuff is great. I think in terms of particularly dark stuff, and again staying in Britain, Derek Raymond was great.
But okay, yeah.
He wrote about sort of the unnamed detective sergeant who we never saw the name of, but he wrote really good dark noir, or Brit noir as it's known. So I think there's some of the big names, and I like reading a lot of sort of the more independent or sort of indie authors as we're called these days. So I think there's so much good writing out there. But I have to say, and the more I read and the more I see with sort of I suppose the commercial publishing side of things, which I'll segue into self-publishing in a moment or from that point. But I think. Look, there's a fair bit of stuff I think that comes out from the big publishing houses, which I would call fairly vanilla and fairly formulaic. And look, I'm not interested in reading that. You know, when I was younger and didn't know any different, yeah, fine. But you know, a lot of that stuff I think now, no. And you try and you read some of it, and I guess this is one of the lodestones of being ex-law enforcement, when you read authors trying to depict law enforcement when they do it badly, they do it really badly. You know, and a lot of the time I think that's just a lack of research. You know, some of the stuff I've seen, you know, and you think that's just so not how the police would operate or deal with something. But you know, that's the publishing industry, I guess. It's what they think will sell, or what their marketing machine will actually cause to sell, which is part of the problem, I think, with the whole literary world now. I mean, and for me, the publishing industry was never going to be an avenue. So I've never ever approached a publishing house or an agent. I mean, I've more recently got some connection with some of the independent publishing places in the United States, because there's quite a few of them there. They don't exist in this country, so we're sort of stuck with the mainstream. But I find, you know, that mainstream side, apart from the fact they're very conservative, they're increasingly woke, and I'm sure that's a subject we're going to talk about shortly. But to me, it was, you know, apart from the difficulty in getting a publishing contract, and you know, and I'll be quite frank, you know, in this day and age, when you're you know, you're a middle-aged straight white guy.
You saved yourself a lot of time and frustration and energy and money sending these things.
Well, that's right. But plus, the big thing for me was about editorial control. And I know in any book that I've published so far, there are a multitude of passages in there which would never ever have made it past an editor's desk at a publishing house. And not because there's anything wrong with the writing, and I'm not saying that to blow my own trumpet, but I mean, there's nothing wrong with the writing. But you know, from the mainstream publishing industry's point of view, there's plenty wrong with what I've got to say, and I think that's the problem.
Lucky you got the time of day back from them. I'm sorry to say they are a breed unto their own, and they've got completely divorced from us and reality and everything else, and even what sells. And it's showing, actually, they're beginning to fall apart now with the rivals, the independents, coming up and revealing the shit show they are. Now, the whole point of this channel is to marry writers with the red-pilled element. Some writers we have on the show, that they're kind of conservative or small c, and it doesn't necessarily come across in their writing. They're on our side, but they're not what I would describe as hardcore. But with reading your book, there's no doubt left in my mind that you're one of the most red-pilled of our guests.
Well,
where did that come from?
I'll wear that hat with pride. So.
Say again?
I'll wear that hat with pride.
Yes, you should. Where did that come from? Before coming back to Australia, during your police years, or subsequently?
Look, I think ever since I was, I suppose, a teenager and sort of developing my own way of thinking, I think freedom has always been something which I'm really, really concerned about. Look, I mean, one of the most, in that respect, I think one of the most formative works that I read as a teenager and have reread as an adult, of course, was Orwell's 1984. And then that, of course, ties into the concept of power. But look, I think there's so many layers to this, but freedom of expression, I think, is absolutely critical. And if we look at human history, the minute you start limiting expression, that you're on the slippery slope down to totalitarianism. Then, and we're seeing it now. It's not dressed up the same. It doesn't run around wearing jackboots in this century. Well, not in our countries anyway. I mean, there are countries, of course, where it's overtly communist or fascist. But I think this whole movement to clamp down on what people can say, and obviously might upset somebody. Look, when I write, and you've read some of my stuff, you would clearly be able to see, I would imagine, that I don't really give a stuff who I upset, because if you don't like what I write, you don't have to read it.
Yeah,
that's the beauty of democracy. So all this thing about banning books is obviously the extreme end of it. But trying to limit what writers can say, and we see this as you would know as well, being a fellow writer, in our writing, and I use the term writing community very loosely because I think we have little communities around the place that I wouldn't say there's one big writing community by any stretch. But we see elements within the writers' world who are actively trying to shut down, people like you and me, and what we have to say, and we see this online all the time on the social media platforms. That's one of the reasons I've got in with the Independent Fiction Alliance in the US, and that's very much a group that is committed to freedom of expression for writers. But I think that's critically important, and I think therefore, I certainly feel responsibility is too strong a word, but I think when I write, I think no, I want to tell the story I want to tell, but I've got a few points to make, along the way. And my view is that that's what writing's for. You're never going to please everybody, and that's fine. I don't write to please anybody in particular. The majority of the feedback I get is really positive. That's fine. That'll do me.
People when you do that, because you're not conscious, you're not trying to please everyone. So you'll find your niche, and you do it very well, I may add as well.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the compliment from a fellow writer always. Look, I think that the real problem with the whole wokeism thing now, and this obsession not wanting to upset people, is we're just ending up with this very bland, sort of writing coming out, which is not really. I mean, they might try to still tell a reasonable story, but is it actually saying anything? Not really. I've got no time for any of that. I mean, look, I think at its core, this whole wokeism thing, it's really just another version of the lust for power dressed up as something supposedly respectable.
Lust for power by the weak.
Well,
the weak and ineffective.
And then we end up with this mode where you can't say this, you can't say that, you might upset somebody. What happened to a bit of resilience around the place? And we end up running a society. I mean, Western liberal democracies, yes, we respect human rights, and that's the human rights of everybody. However, we still run a country for the majority, and now we're slipping into this mode that decisions are all getting made for particular minority groups or minority interests. and that is not to the betterment of the majority of in any of our democracies. And I think the problem, well, there's a couple of problems with that. One is that I don't think, and I'll only speak from an Australian perspective, but I don't think that the majority of Australians are interested in this woke garbage. The problem is that they're also the silent majority. And I think you've got this hardcore of the woke brigade who have really become very vocal. They've become very good at cancelling people and shutting people down. And they've basically seized the whole narrative. And, you are getting people standing up for it in certain degrees, and I'm hoping that we're going to see a lot more people standing up for it. But I think that's one of the things that I do see. And I said responsibility is probably too strong a word, and I'm not trying to sound like I'm something noble out there. I'm not. I'm just a writer who wants to tell a good story, but also tell it the way I want to tell it. But I think, in terms of writers, I think you do need to write openly and freely. If people don't like what you say, that's fine. They're entirely entitled not to. But I think to try and shut anybody down, I just find it appalling.
Now, you've written, unusually for our guests, you've written quite a few books. How many are you at the moment?
So Harry's World, which that's the first. Whoop, there's the camera. That's the first novel. So that came out in 2015. Then Harry's Quest, the sequel to that, came out at the end of 2018. And as the title implies, Harry's off on his quest and it gets nasty. And then the third novel, which I've just literally within the last fortnight finished writing the manuscript for. Now I'm into the editing stages. Joy. That's Harry's Grail. So that's the third in the Harry set of novels. And
there's a short story collection as well.
There is indeed. So that's there's with my now favourite cover designer JT Lindroos in Finland, who does wonderful work. So Harry Kenmare, PI at your service.
Well, let's get on to Harry.
Okay, so that's a collection of short stories. So the novels. All right, let me talk a bit about Harry. So Harry is a character.
Before you go on, I want to interject. Harry, ladies and gentlemen of the audience, is quite the character. I don't think you'll have come across anybody quite as flawed as a hero as Harry. And yet, of course, like all good flawed heroes, he's absolutely charming. I take it he's based, your ancestry is sort of Irish, Scots, English. Harry is sort of taken out of your background, Andrew, in some sense. Because Kenmare's quite an Irish name, I think.
Yeah, in a number of ways. Well, actually, his surname Kenmare is the town in Ireland where my ancestors are from, and they're the ancestors from whom I derive my Irish citizenship. Although I'm fifth generation Australian, but so I had a great grandmother who hailed from there and ended up coming out to Australia. So that's where Harry's surname comes from, as a tribute to that part of my Irish ancestry. In terms of him as a character, I mean, and people often say to me, are you Harry? And if my partner's around, she always chips in and says, oh, he wishes he was. Because, as you know, Harry loves his wine, and he loves the ladies.
We meet him. I want to point out, I think we first meet him in a bordello, basically, and
absolutely.
Undercover. Well, he is kind of working undercover, but Harry kind of likes going to bordellos, it turns out.
Well, that's right. I mean, Harry doesn't really have a line between where work and pleasure meet. It's all part of that. But my genesis for Harry, I didn't want to write a cop character. I mean, I have in some other short story work that I've been doing. Because I wanted to write stories which my main character wasn't constrained by police rules. Because, if you had an actual police character doing what Harry does, then he's obviously going to be a highly corrupt police character. And I think that brings in some other, I suppose, ethical conundrums in terms of your storyline and some of those things. So that's why I wanted to write him as a PI, and obviously having read a lot of the classic PI literature, I really loved that as a genre or a subgenre. So Harry had to be a PI, although of course he's an ex-detective sergeant like me. Although he got booted out of the force, I left with an honourable certificate of service. So, but he got booted out because he, along the short of that was he bashed a pedophile who was in police custody, and because his backstory there is he lost his own daughter to pedophiles. Many years before. So that's sort of Harry's backdrop. So when we first meet Harry, of course, he's a bit of a, your typical broken down drunk private investigator scratching along, and obviously having as much sex as he can possibly get. So, but then of course, things develop and he starts to get a bit of a team around him, and the story goes on from there. So the first novel is actually sort of a set of, the way I've structured them is to have a set of 5 episodes, which each sort of have their own storyline to them, but then there's the overarching storyline that follows through the whole thing. And I've stuck with that formula for both the second and the third novels. So and one of the reasons I did that was because, yes, I want Harry's overall story to be there, but by having him working on different episodes also enables me then to sort of detail other aspects of crime and corruption that are going on. Because look, yes, I write fiction, but there's a lot of stuff in my work which is either somewhat or in some cases very heavily based on truth. So
I really appreciate the way you have intermingled fiction with fact. It works really well, and obviously that's down to your previous experience and knowledge. But you don't shy away from bringing in the harsh facts. You do it in such a way that it's palatable and easy to read. You have a great flair for writing. This comes across almost from the start. In particular, metaphors. You have Harry meets a man whose handshake was like grasping a soggy condom and about as dignified. So, and then later on, he exhaled smoke. His exhaled smoke rolled languorously across the metal table like the creeping mist of a B-grade horror movie. So that will give the reader the listener immediately an idea of your style. You pay a sort of, I think there's a quote from Chandler at the beginning of the book, and there's a Chandler-esque feel throughout, which you pull off very well. And to illustrate that, there's always this scene in the Chandler stories, the Hammett stories, where the femme fatale walks into the office and sort of, yes. The detective's half drunk and not sure what to make of it. And I'm going to read that passage because it is the trial, the test of anybody embarking on this kind of a novel. That scene is like, it's got to be dealt with, and it's got to be dealt with very well because the predecessors have done it so well. And here's your version of it. The apparition slinkily maneuvered her delectable posterior into the chair, crossed her divine legs under her short skirt, and placed her Prada handbag on her lap. Her jade green eyes focused on Harry's burning cigarette, now in the fingers of his right hand, then meandered to meet his gaze. Smoking in the office, don't you know it's the 21st century? He absorbed the accents suggestive of Catherine Deneuve in a playful mood, and detected the slightest hint of a smirk at the corners of her sensuous mouth. His eyes met hers. He paused and then gently grated, "Sue me." So there we are. It's brilliant stuff, and it goes on. That kind of style is continued throughout the book. So Harry, what can we say? Well, actually, there was a few notes I made. A flawed hero from another area, grappling with his own demons, he's on a mission of justice. Hypocritical facades will be smashed, and the rules sure don't always apply. Beware, it's a brutal and libidinous world, sometimes described as dark, debauched, and disturbing. Was it really like this, what you're writing about? Or are you adding, an artistic license to the...
I think, to be frank, I mean, there's both. I mean, I think all of us as writers sort of use some artistic license. But I mean, and sure, I mean, it's like any novel, it's a portion of what's out there. I mean, not the whole of society is as seedy as what Harry deals with, but there's plenty of seedy aspects to society which are generally sort of swept away or kept very quiet. Again, as soon as we start dealing with the establishment, we run into this problem. So I think there's a lot of stuff that I think does need to have a light shone on it, and which is one of the reasons that one of the professions I respect the most are the good investigative journalists out there. Not that there's that many of them left, but when you do have one, they're worth their weight in gold. So I think it's, but I mean, in terms of the power dynamic, sure, it's. I may apply some fairly vivid descriptions to some of it to illustrate the points, but that power dynamic is everywhere out there. I mean, even in the sort of the more mundane type investigation work I do now, I mean, a lot of that's around workplace bullying, and you see, a lot of the same traits are coming through, in those sort of things. It's about power and control.
You keep going back to power control, the establishment, you call it. Are these crimes perpetuated, or allowed, or enabled by the power structure? Or, I mean, is that why it's so much? Is it only because the structure allows these things that they happen, or do they happen outside of the politician, the political environment as well, or is that just, or is that to the minor league compared to what the?
Well, if we're talking sort of the realm of pedophilia, look, I mean, that happens across the social spectrum, and it's one of the few crimes that does happen across the social spectrum, because I mean, certain human beings, that is their sexual proclivity and desire. I think that the problem we have with the establishment, of course, is that, and in fact, in relation to any area of crime, we could probably touch on a couple of others, but certainly in relation to pedophilia, the establishment is very good at protecting itself and protecting its own interests. And that means that, and whilst I'm not suggesting that everybody in the establishment is, sympathetic towards pedophiles, they wouldn't be. But I think, I personally, my firm view is that, when the establishment feels a threat to itself as the establishment, everything else takes second place.
I see.
And so therefore things like pedophilia do get covered up. And look, we've seen so much of it in recent times. Now, look, when it comes out, it comes out. When Epstein was a classic example. But we've had plenty of, and look, the churches. I mean, I remember back in the 90s as a detective, you tried dealing with the Catholic Church. Oh boy, we had some interesting stashes with them and chasing, Catholic priests on the run around Australia. Seriously, I mean, it was because that in terms of institutionalized, but I mean, that's very much part of the establishment.
That is the establishment, isn't it?
And not just the Catholic Church. I mean, any organised churches form part of the establishment. But that's I mean, so your people in power want to preserve the power. They want to preserve that status quo that they've got, and therefore they are prepared to cover up a lot of things which ordinarily shouldn't be, of course. But I mean that extends. It's not just child sex crimes. I mean, obviously, adult sex crimes, as we've seen, people like Harvey Weinstein in America and others. But it extends into your whole financial crime side, extends into organised drug trade. So there's lots of aspects
related as well. They all link together. But luckily, we've got people like you writing books about it, and you're able to put in a few punches of your own, counter punches, because you don't hold back. Here's a little passage about describing a politician. And that it symbolizes, if you like, the modern day politician stroke bureaucrat. And I liked it particularly because it mirrors a little bit the way I treated such people in my book. There's a sort of opening paragraph to give context. And then anyway, here it goes. This guy epitomized the way public service worked nowadays. He had made himself an expert at talking the talk and playing the game. He'd recognised long ago, courtesy of a rat cunning that left the rodent world in awe, the way things were going. Merit and experience had died like sad forgotten battlefield heroes, to be usurped by technocracy, bureaucracy and the sheer self-interest, all dressed up respectably in the language of managerial weasel words and political spin, with a liberal dose of corruption thrown in. For sure, Merv wasn't an architect of this social regression, but now it was his religion, and no faith had ever attracted a convert as dedicated and loyal as Merv. And as with any religious fanatic, if you stood in his righteous way, you paid the price of the heretic. He exemplified the credo that you got ahead by destroying others mercilessly. And to really add to his potency in the game, he genuinely thrived on it. It was his amphetamine in life. Every time he crushed someone, he experienced an ecstatic high and orgasmic joy in the sadistic subjugation of others. Marvellous stuff. It should be bloody printed on every government.
Well, yeah, and obviously that character Merv is a very senior police officer in the first novel. But and we won't go any further on that because I don't want to do any spoilers. But yeah, look, coming back to why the reasons that motivated me to leave the police force originally, it was people like him at senior levels. Now he's obviously not any particular person. You've got to be very careful with that, of course, these days. But there's his character is a combination of a number of people that I've dealt with at that level over my police and subsequent investigation career in government service. That's very much how I see that those levels operating, and it's just getting worse and worse from what I can see. And it wasn't just the police force; it was like that. I said everywhere I worked in the government, it was just as bad. So
that's depressing. Luckily, in your book, they all get their comeuppance. And
well, I think that's one of the beauties of writing fiction. Of course, you can get a bit of justice.
Yeah. In the real world, of course, a lot of these people that you're referring to probably still enjoy their pensions and their freedom.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yep. Sadly, yes.
Knighthoods stolen.
But I think there's a cathartic element too to being able to take out some of these people in the book.
Yeah, definitely. It's one of the reasons I wrote as well, is the catharsis. And in my next novel, I'm going to make sure I pretty much deal with everybody that's left, one way or the other.
Look, yours is on
there we go.
A TBR pile. So I'm looking forward to getting into that. I've got a TBR pile up here, but
you will recognise passages which are parallel with your own.
Looking forward to it, Richard.
Thank you. Thanks for buying.
No, my pleasure. And then of course the Harry short stories was a slightly different, I suppose, direction. So the short stories are all standalones in terms of story. Obviously, some of the characters repeat in them from the novels. But I mean, with the short stories, I actually originally the first one of them was I picked up several years ago. It was an American anthology magazine called Switchblade, coming out of Los Angeles, and that was an anthology magazine dedicated to your hardcore crime writers who most people wouldn't touch in terms of publishing them. So I read the first couple of editions of that. And absolutely loved it. And the editor, Scott Rutherford, a guy who's I'm still very much connected with and doing various things with through the Independent Fiction Alliance. I thought I'm going to give this a go. So I wrote a Harry short story, and the main difference with the writing of it was that I decided, because as you know, in the novels I write in the third person. Which obviously gives you the opportunity to switch points of view and to switch into omniscient and all the rest of it, which is I find very useful from the novel point of view. But for the short story, I decided to try it first person, a la Chandler. Yes. So the Harry short stories are all Harry talking from his told from his point of view, which was a different writing experience, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. And for the short stories, I think that works well. But you can have a lot of fun with those as well. And although it becomes obviously very much an exercise in close editing, because from memory the word limit for Switchblade magazine was I think 4,500 words.
Right, not much.
No, it's not much. And I threw together my first short story, and the first draft came out at 7,000. So I had to do a lot of trimming, but anyway, I was happy with the end result, and more importantly, Mr. Rutherford in Los Angeles was happy with it and published it. So then I went back another 2 times to Switchblade with 2 more Harry stories, and they were published. And then I thought, well, I had a couple more sort of I was working on, and then ended up thinking, right, I'm going to put out a volume of them myself. So the 3 that have been published in Switchblade magazine over the years are all in there, and then there's 4 others as well. So
very good. And tell us about the latest work then that's now about to be edited. That you've written.
So that's Harry's Grail. Well, that's one of them. I've got a few projects on the go at the moment, but I wish there were more hours in the day. So Harry's Grail is the 3rd novel in the Harry set. And you know, the name implies where he's going, where he's sort of getting to on his quest, which is the 2nd novel. So basically, the series becomes, of course, him chasing vengeance for his murdered daughter.
Right.
So so we have a lot of hunting down of people, and some very good torture scenes, and some very illegal activities going on. So, which is a lot of fun to write too. As you said, people getting just desserts. So the 3rd novel obviously wraps up some things, but it also opens up other things. So there will be more Harry. Not only I'm still working on some more short stories. I want to do a 2nd volume of short stories probably next year. But in terms of novels, yes, there will be another novel certainly, and we'll head off on a slightly different tangent with that. So look, I think because people sort of often say, well, is that going to be the end of Harry? You're going to kill the character? No, I'm not. I think there's a lot of fun to be had. I mean, I don't ever want to get to the point where you're just churning them out just for the sake of it. That's not what I want. Well, that's not me as a writer anyway. So it's as long as there are stories to tell, I want to keep writing them. So that's
even if there wasn't a story to tell, he's such an engaging character. I think you could just write a detail a day in his life, and it would be fascinating. Does all the stuff that the rest of us would never do.
Well, yeah, I mean, and look, and that's part of the fun of writing. But as I said, that's one of the reasons I wanted to write a PI character rather than a cop, because obviously being a PI, he doesn't have the same. I mean, yes, he still breaks the law regularly, but he doesn't have those ethical same constraints that a cop, or at least a cop ought to have. So I didn't want that constraint there for me with the Harry. So in terms of, I've got a couple of anthology projects that I'm working on, and one which sort of a bit under wraps at the moment, but that's I'm working with, along with this project I wanted to do, but then I got Vern Smith on board as co-editor, another independent author I've got a lot of respect for. It's so there's a few names will be appearing in that collection, which will be hopefully coming out later this year at some point. I've got
many other Australian writers of your. I mean, you're the first I've had on the show, but simply because I haven't come across many an Australian who's sort of our mental, viewpoint. Are there many others like you around? And have you connected with any, or do you feel very much a black sheep amongst them?
Yes, to a degree. Look, I mean, I mentioned before that I don't think there's any such thing as the writing community. There's little communities around. Yeah. Look, I know authors in the local scene, and I try and interact as much as I can. I don't know anybody who writes down the avenue that I go. I mean, I find a lot of look, I know some authors here who write very good stories, but it comes back to it's all very correct, and I think a bit vanilla. But
there's no red-pilled faction that you can point your finger at.
Definitely not. No. Despite Australia's reputation as sort of being, full of larrikins and all the rest of it, that's a myth. This is a very, very conservative country in a lot of ways. and it's embraced wokeism horribly.
Yeah.
I mean, we're not alone like that, of course, but it's
shocking, isn't it? I mean, yesterday was Anzac Day, and you think of those guys and the feats that they achieved, which are superhuman and so on, and their great-grandchildren or whatever are crying because the Wi-Fi's gone down for 10 minutes and the latte's.
Well, yes, exactly. And even worse than that, I mean, there's a push in some parts in Australia to abolish Anzac Day.
Yeah, I can well imagine. Well,
yeah, which I find absolutely horrendous. You know, because I can't. I mean, both of my grandfathers went away with the Australian infantry. One to the trenches in the First World War, and as an 18-year-old, and the other one to the jungles in Indonesia in the Second World War. And he ended up in Changi prison camp. I can't begin to imagine what my grandfathers went through.
Yeah.
Not in an instant. So, but you know, it's because of you know the sacrifice. I mean, look, they both made it back to Australia. Of course, you know, across all of our country's forces, I mean, millions of men didn't make it back. But you know, it's and everything that we enjoy, you know, is based on the sacrifice that they made. And of course, then the sad irony of that, of course, is that it's the only reason you get to be woke in the first place is because of the sacrifice that those people made. You know, you can't be woke over in Beijing, you know, or Tehran or Moscow, you know. No. That's you're straight off to the camps if you're woke over there. So yeah, so it is the irony that it's the fact that we do have a Western liberal democracy and people have been prepared to go and fight and die for it. But that also enables, of course, people to be anti-democracy, which is effectively what I think wokeism is. Although it dresses itself up as, you know, we care about people and we're virtuous and all that garbage. Yeah, it's just a facade. You know, it's just a disguise, really.
Okay, you'll see that when you get into Lost Causes. That's the whole point of the book,
good,
really.
Good. I'll definitely look forward to that.
Well, it's a sort of depressing note that we leave on because Australia, of all places, it has shocked many of us the way it's gone there. If there was any hope for the world, it was somewhere down there out of the way, and you had a chance to avoid the worst of all of it, but you seem to have embraced it harder than anybody. But we've got things to entertain us in the meantime. Books like yours give us a chuckle here and there and an insight into what the nature of this enemy of ours is. And it's some compensation in a rather tragic world at the moment.
Yeah.
Thank you, Andrew. Thanks for coming on the show.
My pleasure, Richard.
It's been a great pleasure to have you.
And now it's gone very quickly.
Yes, it does, doesn't it? If you know any other red pill writers or come across any from Australia, I'd love to have them on the show. So please let them know. But
yeah, I think most of the ones that I know and sort of you know regularly speak to and have cultivated friendships with, I think most of them are based in the US.
Yeah, I think it is America-centric and some English people now.
Yeah.
Anyway, you keep writing and maybe get you back to talk about Harry in a future date. You never know.
That'll be great. Love to. Love talking. You know, thank you very much for the invitation, Richard. It's been wonderful to meet you effectively online and to chat. That's been great. So I look forward to talking on an ongoing basis.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
All right. My pleasure.